Good afternoon, ma'am. Today I wanted to ask you a few questions about the ICSE English literature.
Yes.
My first question is, could you please explain the pattern of the ICSE English literature with special emphasis on the MCQs?
Okay, for English literature ICSE we have 4 sections. Section A is compulsory, that is MCQs, and then we have B, C and D, from which you have to attempt 5 questions, but at least 1 question from each of the sections. Now especially for the MCQs it's very important. Why? First of all, for 16 marks. And then you have analytical questions, you have reasoning questions, you have evaluating questions. So that is very important, other than recalling, which you generally have for all the MCQs. So here I would suggest very important is the sequence of events, where they just state few events from a story and they will ask you to state the sequence. So unless you are knowing the full story, you will not be able to attempt that particular question. So very important is to read the text thoroughly. And then you have questions on literary devices, generally not recognizing the figure of speech, but you will have to recognize the figure of speech yourself and then see the examples and then give the option. So that is one thing. And then the reasoning and assertion questions is also very important for that MCQs, because I have seen that many a time students, they are not able to score in 70s or 80s because they are going down on the MCQs. Though they are doing that drama, prose or poetry paper very well, they are going down on the MCQs. So that is something I think is very important, reading the text thoroughly and remembering the sequence of events and to know the literary devices generally of the poems.
Okay. My second question is, how should students prepare for the questions based on the drama Julius Caesar?
Okay, for Julius Caesar, for section B, C and D, we are having reference to the context questions. And for Julius Caesar, few things that I think has to be kept in mind is that very important is to first understand and recognize the extract from which particular act it has been given, from which particular scene it has been given, and to sort of remember what happens before the extract and what happens after the extract, because they set questions like what happens immediately after this, and the students, if you are writing what happens maybe after 2 or 3 scenes later on, you will not be able to write that. What happens immediately after this extract means what is happening just after that particular extract. And for Julius Caesar, another thing is very important. You might be knowing the speeches of Brutus and Antony. So they are also your opinion, who is better, opinion that based on the characters, who do you think is a better speaker, orator, or later on who do you think is a better soldier, Cassius or Brutus. And for every RTC questions you have the HOT questions, the higher order thinking question, where both understanding and analysis is required. And here many a times when you are asked about your opinion, students are the answer that they are giving or the opinion that they are giving is not aligning with the given statement. I will just give you an example. For example, if you are being asked, how do you know that Caesar was not ambitious? So you can't tell that because he wept when the poor cried. There you will have to specify that he had refused the crown 3 times at Lupercal, or after his defeat he had filled the state ransom. So that you will have to pay attention to that part. Okay. So that is important.
My third question is, what would you suggest to help students write concise yet complete responses for the RTC questions?
For the RTC questions, I think again I will have to tell that reading the text thoroughly is very important, and not only relying on summaries and only on notes. Reading the text is very important for both poetry and specifically the prose part. Very important to be thorough with the descriptions of the people mentioned. You have different characters in the story. Very important to be aware of the events. And another very important thing, to know about the sequence. What is happening in the beginning of the story, what is happening towards the end. So that is something you need to keep in mind regarding the RTC questions. And don't just write very long answers. Look for, very important is to mention the keywords, and that has to be mentioned from the text referring to the extract given in the question. That is important.
Okay. And lastly, I would like to ask you, what kind of preparation is required from students from the poetry and prose sections of the English paper?
For the poetry section, I would suggest that only knowing the summary is not only sufficient. For poetry section, very very important is to know the central idea of the poem, to know about the theme of the poem. Here also for poetry also you are asked about your opinions. What do you think? Do you think that this particular poem could have had a different ending, or do you think this particular poem could have had a different title? So that is important, and very very important is the literary devices that you need to know. I had mentioned earlier during MCQs, that is important for the poetry section.
And for the prose?
Prose, again I will have to tell, thorough reading of the text is very very important. And another thing is that you have to avoid long generalized answers. Look for this, the question is asked why, you have to write only that why, that keywords. I think the reading time that is given, 15 minutes reading time that the students are getting, has to be utilized properly, so that they get to know which part they can answer. Another thing is that students should avoid repetition. For 2 questions they are writing the same answer. If 2 questions are given, means the answers will have to be different. So that is something I think avoiding. Repetition is also a very major thing that the students need to keep in mind.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.